All right. We are live with Vivek Sharma, who every time I hear an announcement about something that the company that he founded, Movable Ink, accomplished, I literally have a flashback to a moment in Madison Square Park this is 2010 or 2009?
It was 2010 when we pivoted into this idea.
2010. At 2010, the third event that I threw at the Shake Shack for the New York tech community, and he was super excited to show me a pivot that he had worked through, and he pivoted right into competition with an existing first round capital portfolio company, which meant that I wasn't going to be able to write a check. So I have been a big fan on the sidelines of everything that his company has accomplished, and we're going to talk for a little bit about that journey. So first of all, congrats on after about 16 years replacing yourself and bringing in a CEO, and also just like building a company that has lasted this long. I don't know if you had any thoughts as to how long this journey might be when you started, but I think my first question is going to be from starting out as a founder to being a CEO. And if you just think back for a moment, is there a difference between being in founder mode, the scrappiness, doing multiple hats, to feeling like what you now have is something different, that is a company that requires a CEO, and what is that like? And maybe actually if you can just give us a little bit of an intro of what Movable Ink started out as and how that grew over time.
Sure, absolutely. And first, let me just say thank you, Charlie, for having me here, but also for the New York community, the New York tech community. You have invested in it before there was ever a thing. You could fit everyone in New York tech in, your annual Christmas party in one bar. I remember there was everyone would be there, and it wasn't as lonely feeling knowing there were other people like this, even if it was a small number. And then everything changed, and your Shake Shack events are the best event in New York. And that week that we had pivoted, you had introduced us to Josh Koppelman at First Round, and we were just too early with the original idea. And Josh is an e-commerce expert, and there's so many things that we hadn't thought about that he ran circles around our ideas. But we pivoted into Movable Ink, which basically the premise was we didn't know a lot about email marketing. I didn't know a ton about it, but we were playing with the tools. I was using MailChimp and Campaign Monitor. I'd done e-commerce before and thought marketing was an interesting opportunity. And we realized that companies had huge stores of data. They were tracking it in their CRM, or they were in different systems. CSV files are still kind of the lingua franca of marketing departments. But turning that into content that is personalized was something that they had not done effectively. And I mentioned MailChimp and Campaign Monitor because we thought small businesses, maybe we'd never have to hire a sales team. This is such a genius idea that the moment you open an email, we would call into different data sources, including contextual live data sources like the weather outside or time of day, and it would generate the ideal piece of content for you. And we learned that we're not doing a good job. We're really struggling to sell $20 a month deals. And enterprises, when we closed our first $70,000 pilot, we're like, what are we doing here? Let's pivot completely and just do that over and over. And it turned out to be a huge problem for big companies that have vast stores of data, need to engage with their customers in a bigger way. So Movable Ink started from that. I think the other company, Live Intent, we had a common angel investor, and I thought that was going to be super competitive. But Josh Baer, who is our angel, he's like, don't worry about this. Matt's an ad guy. He's going to build an ad business. You're CR. And I wasn't feeling certain about it, but as it turned out, we never really collided. And I got to know Matt and that team over the years, and great guys too.
You know, the story of coming enterprise first, I do feel like early on, especially in the days of like MVPs and lean startup, that's a story I've heard a lot, where like, who do I know that would buy this thing? Let me price low and make it simple for a handful of people to get using. And you just assume that enterprise is a thing that you work your way up to,
Hmm.
versus realizing that like many enterprises have a lot more complexity than somebody who's willing to pay $20 a month and really, really need these tools in a big way.
Yeah, that and things had changed with the enterprise buyer that I didn't appreciate. Back in, after college, I was out in Silicon Valley and I worked for this CRM company, retail CRM called Blue Martini Software. And I was an engineer, and the sales team, it just seemed very mysterious what they did. They could walk into a room and they'd come out with a $2 million contract for software. It just seemed like a very complex process and a lot of buy-in. And that was true of on-premise software. And I think the cloud movement changed some things. And what I was really surprised at was that by 2010, when we started this, we started having these meetings. One, a partner, Cheetah Mail, brought us into a meeting with American Express, me and our first sales guy. We're wearing startup t-shirts, and they walk us in and there's 10 people eager to meet with us and understand our solution. And that was just mind blowing for me. And I realized for the first time something had shifted and enterprises were willing to take a bet on a startup, innovation budgets, or doing something small scale, realizing interesting things are happening there, not in the companies that are 20 years old. So that had changed, and you got to try some things and not be afraid of setting a high price point, solving a big problem. And there's just a lot more data. There's just a lot more fragmentation in enterprise marketing departments than there are with the mom and pop corner store that's running MailChimp, and that extra $10 a month is really going to mean a lot for them to part with. So it's almost easier to get the $100,000 from the enterprise that is an extra $10 a month from someone who's not convinced they need your solution.
So when did you start to feel like the CEO of a company versus a startup founder sort of trying to shake loose product market fit?
Yeah. Again, none of these things, you have no idea what you're getting into when you start things. And I don't think I ever planned on being a CEO of a company. I didn't even know about starting a company. I went to school in upstate New York at Rensselaer. I started as an aerospace engineer. Computer science, I flipped over into because that ability to have an idea, build it, and see it in reality was much greater than building my own rocket. I'm not Elon Musk. So
Well, Elon doesn't really build his own rockets either.
he doesn't either. Yes, exactly. But that was really exciting to kind of ship something, build something, put it out there, and get feedback. And so I think building things, the byproduct of that was we're building something and we're going to need some structure. We'll have to take on some investment. But it wasn't like I need to be a CEO of 1,000 person company. It was this is fun to go build things. And it's providing, usefulness, utility for someone on the other side. And it's to, you understand a problem, you understand. And that is, I think, founder mindset for a lot of people. And at some point, the organization starts to become larger. You have 20 employees, 30 employees, around 60 people there were some things that were really starting to break down culturally. And early days, you assume you hire good, smart people that are good people, kind, well-minded. You're sitting around a table, everyone just shares the context, and that is just continues on. But things start to break when you hit these inflection points. There's managers that come into the company from other places that they've worked. I had not done a good job defining our values or our culture, and things start to break down in really weird ways. And you don't know. You're the last to know as the CEO what's going on. And I realized after talking to a bunch of people, we had some really broken things happening in the company, and it was on me. I had to go fix this. So it was the first time I set our values. And rather than, picking out a bunch of words, I looked at who are the superstars in the company that I'm really admiring. I love how they conduct themselves. They're delivering impact. And what are the traits that they all seem to have in common? And from that, we distilled our three values: curiosity, empathy, and grit. And we started hiring for it. And we fired people who didn't meet those values. We promoted people who could get things done, but also treat other people really well. And so I think if you talk to current inkers or people, we call them inkers, people who work here, who worked there, this was really special. And people spent over a decade at the company. People really long tenures. We had new people come in and say, this is amazing. I normally see 2 or 3 years as the new people I'm working with, but long tenured employees that got to build their careers, and it was worth the investment. And if I were to start a new company, I would do that on day one.
It's interesting. One of my limited partners, and it goes to show you how big of an outcome that company was, is employee number 22 at Datadog. And he had made a comment to me. I'm not exactly going to get this number right, but it's something like 2/3 of the people who came before him, as of just a couple of years ago, were still at the company. And it's just really shocking to me that you could have that long a run and that size outcome. And of the first 20 employees, that the majority of them would build 10-year plus careers at the company. Do you think that's something like What do you think makes people want to stay, or is it a function of did you pick a kind of profile of person who could grow into a role or some combination maybe?
We started getting more structured around our interview process. And Mark Michelle, who was at Compound, was on our board. And, we were struggling with interviewing, hiring the right people. And he said, "Hey, you should read this book called Who." And I read that book, and it is a structured way of doing an interview, kind of the behavioral interview that goes through everyone's resume in a very detailed way. And the reference checks that you do are consistent with that, and it's super effective. So for those founders out there, I would recommend this book called Who. And the system they have is called top grading. It's not the Microsoft top grading, but it's a way to identify talent that lines up with exactly what you're looking for. You are being very clear in your scorecard about the talent. You're matching people's backgrounds and their career progression, and you're reference checking in a way that the references end up being transparent. And that reference check is like 70% of you learn a lot from it. But I think it is a combination of hiring people who truly fit the things that you're trying to do. But a lot of people have worked in places that it's just really miserable. It can be toxic. It can be difficult to get things done. It's demoralizing. And not to say that Move Blank was perfect at this, but we cared about this stuff, and people stuck around. And whenever you heard it, it was about the people. It was solving the customer challenges, which was interesting. But the people that they got to work with that were very smart and kind. It's just this joy of getting things done. And that everyone's got a personal bar that they are trying to achieve, and they know that the people around them are trying to make this thing happen too. So there's an assumption of a positive intent from your fellow employees.
You,
Now,
you know,
I will caution that those early employees are important, but to not have the culture fixed around just early employees, because these cliques form, and a later group's like, well, I'm on the outside of this. And you have to constantly think about the new employee experience and how do you fit them in, and how do you break down old silos and cliques, and this is my lunch table over here. And so we were really trying to be intentional about that as well.
I've even heard that in a smaller startup where I was talking to someone who's an employee and they made a comment about the kind of org structure on their team and they outlined it like, well, this person is not really above me, but they were an original member of the team. And so that person and their manager have like a special kind of relationship because that person was there from the beginning and it's hard where people feel like they can't break into that inner circle or there's something preventing them. It has nothing to do with the structure, all of that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
I, I
Oh,
I
one other thing I'll mention in New York, if you'll remember, we didn't have the institutional memory of like people who'd come out of enterprise software
right.
companies. And so when I was looking for a director or VP, very often I wouldn't find that person here in New York. And so we didn't trust people, take a leap of faith and say, this is a smart, high agency person. And let me just go trust them to go figure out this job. And more often than not, they did. And that, I think, really people noticed that and felt rewarded, and careers have been built so much that the CEO of Movable Ink now was our first VP of customer success. He was our first real manager in the company, Adam Stamblek, and he's been with us for 12 or 13 years. He was our VP of customer success. He became our chief revenue officer, an unconventional bet because he'd never run a sales department before, but he got along great with our upsell sales leader, became our president of go to market. And last year, we did a majority sale of the company to a private equity firm named STG, and who've been great. And as of 2 months ago, maybe 3 months almost, Adam, I felt like he'd be a great CEO for the company. We had a conversation. He had a lot of interest in taking that next step. And so I'm here to support Adam and the team in what they're doing now.
So I'm curious about the traits of someone who can step into something that they haven't necessarily done before. And what do you think, well, it's just in general and Adam specifically, is the thing that has enabled him to do roles that were not necessarily previously on his resume?
Mhm.
Because as a startup, you sometimes have to do that, right? Because it's like, well, the person with this exact thing on my on their resume cost me $400,000, which I don't have. So I got
Yeah.
to take a risk on somebody because that's where I am. What's the trait?
There's a hidden benefit. I think now I've come to believe a mix of people. My early days, I was probably a little biased to, oh, this person's been there, done that. I want that experience. And this is the Silicon Valley playbook. And I realized some mix of those people are good to have, but someone who doesn't know how they're going to do that next thing, they obsess about figuring out how it works. And so this is not a shortcut knowledge that someone else gave you the answer and said, this was the playbook at Oracle. This was the playbook at Salesforce. They're figuring it out on their own, and they may come up with some different answers. And so you're learning things from first principles, and it's uncomfortable. And that the first year Adam did the chief revenue officer job, incredibly intense and stressful. There's a whole organization. Rarely are you having an exec change when things are going perfectly well. There's a problem that's happening in that organization. And he had to come in and go figure out what is going on, talk to a lot of people. And that first year was brutal, but they figured out how to build a new type of organization, a new structure, how you train people, how we go hit much bigger numbers without the old math sort of being a bias that we had. So comfortable with being uncomfortable. That's where the learning happens. You, by necessity, end up learning from first principles. And I would say not just Adam, for myself, for Adam, for so many people in the company, they've been thrown into the deep end on something. And it's amazing to see how people learn and realize they are capable. They're more capable than they ever thought.
So one of the reasons behind getting together for this interview was actually my book,
Yes.
Founder Unfriendly.
Congratulations on the book.
And it's all about fundraising. And I've had a couple of people ask me, okay, well, what comes next after this? Let's say I do successfully raise. There's a bunch of things that it doesn't necessarily address about relationship with investors. And you mentioned Mark, and there's a lot of things you hear about what it means to take on venture capital and the relationship, and you're going to lose control of the company and they're going to be in your ear all the time, or don't give them too much information because they're going to be all up in your business. Founders know how to run the company. How would you describe what should be a productive investor relationship, and are there things that you or your investors have done that have made that a good working relationship? So if somebody was apprehensive about taking people on, how would you talk to them about making sure that relationship works out?
You are partnered with this person for a very long time. So I think it's important to make sure you're aligned. I've come to believe, just the data about the company, be as transparent and share, whether it's a prospective employee or an investor, because they're going to find out the truth anyway 2 months after the check lands, 3 months after they start at the company. And much better to be, here are the things that are working well. Here's the raw data. And then here's my lens. I'm looking at this and this is what I see the opportunity as. We have to work on this kind of thing, but this is what it could be if we are very successful at doing these things. And so there's no surprises. That first board meeting, you don't want to have a big glaring surprise. And I think there's bad feelings that could be harbored from it just starting off on the wrong foot. So I'll share with the investor who STG, who, PE's got this like bad rap, and, I know every PE firm is different. And so when we were going through this sale process, I did have some ambivalence about it, but STG, I'll give you, they came in and said, guys, here is what we've researched your business. We've been talking. We've done analysis. We've talked to your customers. We've done diligence calls. This is what they're saying to us, that you guys are doing well. Here are the things that you could go improve. Here's what we think the financial profile of the company could be. But, this is just one idea. We want you to kind of tell us and partner with us. And so they were remarkably consistent about what they were looking for, that even at, month after, 3 months after, there was it's like, I get it. And I respect this so much. It's not opaque. This is what you're looking for. We think we can do this. And we have this alternate way, maybe on a couple of things about how we get there. But it was a very transparent conversation, so much that, STG even has had a CEO, a former CEO that they acquired the company of, check in on, hey, do you have any feedback for us as a firm and on the partner, on the things that we could. And so the transparency, the data, the common, the consistency with like, this is what we're all kind of aiming towards, and a willingness to also take feedback, as VCs and investors are very good at giving feedback, but very few ask for feedback. So it just made it very comfortable to have an honest conversation every time, and not having an emotional, it's like, all right, here's the truth. let's work together on how we figured this thing out, or this bad thing happened. Let's be really transparent about it. And I would encourage, every investor who kind of takes that attitude, I think builds a very strong bond with the CEOs running the company. So I think they've been fantastic. And it's probably not a surprise. That's big part of their success about the transparency.
So let's take a moment to sort of talk a little bit about the space. It's interesting. I had a conversation with Neil Capel
Oh yeah.
ages ago, and
Neil's
he
great.
he made a comment to me about how when he started that you had to sort of explain to investors sort of this is what my product does, and because there's so much open space, and then very quickly there were 9 products doing sort of somewhat similar stuff, and it became sort of a differentiation game, and it changed the way he sort of did marketing and positioning, that it was much more sort of relationship driven and not feature based, and because the market got crowded very quickly. How have you been able to sort of position and move with the market, or just like building marketing tools over a 16-year period, considering the changes and mobile and all of this sort of stuff? What do you think was sort of core to your product philosophy and positioning that has enabled what you were building to sort of stick with the customers versus lose out to the next big thing, or get upended by a technology shift?
Yeah, and there are, according to Scott Brinker's martech landscape, there are 14,000 martech companies that have been built. Probably only a dozen of them have exceeded $100 million in ARR and revenue. Movable Ink is very proud to be one of those companies, and it wasn't obvious from the early days. But Neil was one of the guys I met super early on. I think he had a 20-person company, and it was just like 3 of us doing Movable Ink. So we knew at that time we didn't want to be the primary messaging platform. It seemed like there were a lot of players there, and so I respect Neil for going to battle with the titans in that space. And it's a different strategy. I think Braze has done that successfully. They focused on a couple of things, technical merits, but at the time, it didn't feel like that was the safe strategy. It felt like way too much competition, too much incumbency, customer relationships, things like that. So we focused on a problem. We thought the big guys, which were probably 5 of them, it was Exact Target, Responses, Cheetah Mail, Epsilon, at least 4. The big ones weren't doing content well. So all these great data assets handle the email marketing. So we thought about jujitsuing these. Let's go talk about a really useful use case and let's partner with these companies. Let's just solve this problem. Let's get some momentum going. Let's get some big enterprises. And by the way, we have over 500 enterprises as customers. Everyone from American Express to the Home Depot to Morgan Stanley, JP Morgan Chase, Meta, Google, on and on. So add 20 divisions of Amazon that we work with. That wouldn't have happened if we tried to boil the ocean, do everything ourselves, and try to capture those customers and have a broad enough solution. So this content generation problem, we partnered with the ESPs, and usually these partnerships don't work. But our first one was incredibly successful because what we didn't realize was these companies were battling, and Cheetah Mail at the time wasn't innovating fast enough. So they gave us a platinum sponsorship to their conference. I was on stage, packed room, 160 people in the crowd. I don't think of myself as like a really strong salesman, but apparently the way I was doing it was really compelling and people were just like blown away, and I was getting hit up left and right. So that turned into an innovation engine for that company. It helped us bootstrap, build a strong customer base, and all the other ESPs. We had an exclusivity period for a bit of time. It made them jealous, and they were all a little ticked off, but then they all wanted to partner with us as well. So that was something that we started with that one problem. We broadened it. We had the biggest integration library into every sort of data source. So we had all the use cases. Competitors did show up. We also invested in a client services team because our customers wouldn't know how to think about use cases in effective ways. If you just throw this tool over the fence, they're not going to be effective. And so we invested in that and we learned really great ideas and it fed into the product. And so I think that gave us the beachhead and gave us permission to go to the next leg, which 4 or 5 years ago, we bought an AI company called Coherent Path, and that is our DaVinci AI solution. So before AI was really in vogue in the martech space, we were making our own efforts towards it, and we acquired a company, and now it is growing at an incredibly high clip for us, and it's being adopted by some of the biggest enterprises.
So that's actually really good pivot. Right before we started, I'd asked you what you're spending your time on, and you're still involved with the company. You were working on where the AI opportunity is and implementation and all of that. And I'm also curious. I don't know if you've probably been hit up by startups for angel investments. I don't know if you're doing any of that or looking in this space, but if to a founder today building in an AI native ecosystem, and now you're looking at a company embedded with big customers, making sure you're moving as fast as that startup trying to disrupt you
Yeah.
is trying to move. What is your take on what AI can enable? And also from like the proverbial two-person startup, is there something that you would be looking for if you were to like start a company today and use AI that you think would like make the company last and not get disrupted by a couple people vibe coding over a weekend, right? Because things just feel like they're moving so
Yeah.
fast.
So for Movable Ink, there are three areas that we thought about AI. One was in the product itself. So DaVinci being an example where we're using deep learning and this manual process of doing marketing feels very time intensive, and you're unlikely to yield the best results because someone in a room had an idea in their head, and that's what's going out to 10 million people in your campaign. So DaVinci is really good at figuring out what content resonates with each individual and puts them on a path of exposure to new types of things. So AI in the product, AI for the product development team. We're using things like Claude and other codecs to generate a lot of our code. And so we were pushing right around GPT 2.5. I started paying attention to it. And at 3, I'd asked my CTO, co-founder, Michael, hey, is it good enough yet? What do you think? And it's like, no, no, no. And then early last year, hey, this is actually getting pretty good. And we started to use it more aggressively and even mandate it for a 2-week period for every engineer. And so the models have just gotten so good. So the job of we don't have to cover that here. I think it's been covered pretty broadly. The job of a builder is changing significantly. But the organizational transformation, AI transformation of a bigger company with intelligence at its core, this is something that I think a lot of companies haven't figured out yet. And that's why you see these stories about ROI hasn't been seen in AI. You can't just throw it over the fence. There's a way to think about it that I think AI native startups, it's just the default for them. So if I'm starting a new company, I am unlearning. I'm aware of all the things I've learned with a bigger company, but I think there's a new set of things, and unlearning and first principles is really important. I keep the team much smaller. We would build AI and intelligence into the core. We would use agents all over the place to automate all sorts of work. As a company scales, communication becomes the hardest challenge and keeping people aligned. So if you can keep that small and use AI to X, 10x your team, you're just going to move so much faster. And then the last challenge for a startup today is the friction has been removed. An early startup I had to pay $6,000 a month for rack space servers and go host this and do all like jump through the hoops. And then, Ruby on Rails came around, you're able to generate your app and have the scaffolding, and there's cloud hosting. So a lot of friction points left. And so today, without friction for building ideas, there can be interesting ideas, but there can be ideas that are going to be incredibly in a competitive space a year from now, 2 years from now, 5 years from now. So that's very demoralizing to put so much effort into something that the rug gets swept out from under you. So I would think long and hard about what is the structural advantage, the moat, if you will, of this business, and network effects, unique data, things that the model providers couldn't solve and offer on their own because no one would trust the software being, kind of graded by the one offering it. I would start to think about unconventional ideas and think about it in a completely different way. So a lot of these companies that are, accelerating to hundreds of millions in revenue, I don't know if some of them are going to be around 3 or 4 years from now. So this is it's very stressful for everyone in tech, whether you're running a large company or you're a very small startup. I can get more tools than ever, but that reduction of friction means you need a really smart team thinking about what areas to apply, what problems to truly solve, and to be more ambitious than you ever were before. So what we did with Move Blank was pick off this one little piece and expand. And today, I think you can offer a much more ambitious solution right out of the gate because of what the AI tools offer you.
The one thing I would also add too, because you brought this up earlier, is investing in customer success.
Mhm.
Ultimately, if anybody can build anything, one advantage is you're going to have is a human across the table from you who takes the time to understand your business
Definitely.
and who can say things like, "What are you trying to do? Let's see if we can use our tools to help you with this." And if I feel secure that somebody at the other end is listening to what I'm trying to do, then I'm not likely to switch just because somebody pops up a sort of similar feature, because 2 weeks later, the company I'm currently using is gonna get to parity with that feature, and that relationship, I think, is incredibly important. I've been using a couple of vibe coding and other tools, and it just really strikes me that they also, on the front lines, use AI for service and support.
Hmm.
And actually, while I love the tool for building, I actually hated the experience of getting the same, and it's particularly kind of funny in a vibe coding tool where something breaks and you're chatting, and then you chat with this other bot that is effectively powered by the same engine. It's like, did you try this? I was like, we already had the same conversation over here. Like,
Yeah.
I kind of need a person.
Yeah.
Can you get a person somewhere?
Yeah, the services was a bad word in for venture investors for the longest time, and the gross margins of companies wouldn't look as good. But now that's completely flipped. So this is the fundamental assumptions are being upturned. And that's the thing for there's a value in the expert who can show you how to do this thing with this tool, or it's just a relationship building that you're not just being bought for the thing that you do today, but for where you're going into the future, and having great customer success people who are on top of the business, understanding it deeply and thinking about how to apply the technology most effectively to your business. We built a strategy function at Movable Ink that would have experts in each of the verticals, a retail expert, a financial services expert, a travel expert, et cetera. And that proved to be really valuable, where it's not just a generic solution, but it's understanding what they're really trying to solve and how do you harness a technology for the biggest impact within that business.
Last question before I let you go, and I really appreciate all your time. Is there a hire that stands out? Not necessarily just person specific, but role that you wish you would have hired earlier?
Well, if I think back to the early days, I think the right kind of HR or people leader super early on, both for the recruiting and the culture setting side, it would have saved a lot of pain early on.
Yeah,
I'll
I
say
don't
that.
I have literally never heard of anybody hiring early for people and HR and regretting.
But
That's the
it's a different type of profile. I think that it's very pragmatic and like getting things done. And we have an awesome people leader at Move Blank right now. And she's our chief people officer, but she was at Meta for a number of years. And when we hired her, we knew it was a bigger title. It was punching above her weight class, but she's been fantastic. That kind of pragmatic leader that would have been hugely helpful in the early days too.
that's awesome. Vivek, congratulations. Exciting to see you're still continuing to innovate and learn new things and get focused on the sort of next wave of all of this stuff. I really appreciate all the time you've spent.
Thank you, Charlie. It's great to be here. And thank you for having me.
No problem.